Hi, everybody, and welcome to the next installment of the Mirus webinars. This one's going to be focusing on operational efficiency and planning for financial sustainability. And we just thought it was a really timely moment with all of the changes that are going on, with all of the things impacting financial situations and the end of the financial year and the budgeting process, that this was the topic I think that we should focus on this month. Next month, we're going to focus on looking forward for the whole year. But for this webinar, we wanted to really focus on what are the financial impacts affecting us right now. And before we just begin, I just want to acknowledge that I'm actually in Perth today. So I'm acknowledging a different people, the Whadjuk people and the Noongar country. That's where I am today in Perth, and I'd like to pay my respects to the traditional owners of the land on which I'm at least having this meeting today, and extend that to wherever you are today and to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people who are on the call. So I just want to remind you all, particularly as it's the end of the financial year, that this does qualify for a registration point for those of you who are collecting registration CPD points. In terms of the chat, we do have a very active chat channel going on here. Just remind you, put your questions in there. There's no way of asking them in an open forum. Only the panelists have access to the camera and the microphone, but please put your comments and questions in the chat. We've got people monitoring the chat. Petra's with us here monitoring the chat. We'll answer whatever questions we can live, and we'll try to make time at the end to feedback any key questions into the panel and into the discussion as well. But you can have a discussion there. Please remember to tag everyone rather than the panelists, so everyone can see the questions that you're asking. Thanks. That's a little bit about what we're going to do today. It's a pretty standard format, but let's just get into it. So one of the things we're doing in the most recent webinars is asking some polling questions. So quite a number of you, more than half of you, responded to those polling questions this time. And there's some really interesting results. So how far off fair funding do you think we are? Now, I think what's interesting here is not just, it's not surprising that 95% of people think we need more funding. And this doesn't go into, in this question, how we get that funding. But so it's not surprising 95%, but interesting, I think, that nearly 50% think that the funding gap is 15% or higher. So we just use that as an arbitrary number of significant increase in funding. And you particularly think about that on the back of two of the largest increases of funding that have ever been given to aged care in Australia. Obviously, they've been given for very specific purposes. So they come in, the funding comes in and it goes straight back out in terms of cost of care minutes or cost of wage increases, but significant increases of funding, but still a broad feeling that 15+% is an interesting good number. Care funding is adequate if there's more opportunity to include greater user pays revenue from accommodation services. So we know this is probably where we're going to go. We don't know how quickly, but what we're trying to test here is to what extent do people think that is the answer? And what's interesting is a good 30% of people disagree or strongly disagree. So we're probably not surprised that close to 50% of people agree with this, because there's a pretty strong debate going on about this at the moment, and has been going on for some time at all levels of the industry and the government. But really interesting there that 30% don't think that this is the answer, and another 20% are a little bit undecided about that. And the last one, my business will continue to go through significant transformation, increase financial sustainability. What we're trying to gauge here is we're already going through a lot of change. There's already significant transformation going on. We know we're facing new standards and lots of other things that are going to change the way the business runs. And certainly the drive towards care minute compliance will put a lot of pressure on existing care models, as it sort of starts to dictate what gets paid for and what doesn't get paid for. But clearly, what's that? 89%, nearly 90% believe they're going to have to continue to go through transformation, to significant transformation, to increase their financial sustainability. And yeah, I don't know that surprises us. It surprises me a little bit that it's so large, but that's almost a unanimous agreement that we need to continue to change significantly. So let's talk about financial sustainability. What we want to really drive to is, we know there are a lot of drivers. We've got an esteemed panel that we're going to come and speak to in a minute. I'll introduce you to them in a little bit. But what we're first going to do, what we like to start these sessions off with, for those of you who are used to them or joining for the first time, we like to start with some data. We like to start with some facts. We like to base the discussion and the argument on some data and some insight. So I'll throw over to Tyler now, to our data scientist, to give you some insights from the data and what it's showing us.
Thanks, Andrew. Yeah, I want to take a bit of a closer look at accommodation revenue and some of the industry performance markers in relation to that revenue stream. And I know ANAC and Care Minutes get a lot of attention, and rightfully so. They are our largest income and expense, respectively. But for the first time, they are legislatively linked. So higher subsidy levels will lead to higher care minute requirements and therefore expenditure. So the margin available is fixed. So, when we do spend a lot of time talking about, how do we become very analytical with realizing the optimal margin. And Andrew, like you say frequently, is that this model really is a recovery model, and the best we can really hope to do is ensure that we're realizing that full capacity of margin that is hedged in that bounds of subsidy entitlement and care minute requirement. But that hedged margin, that even the optimal scenario where you're utilizing your full roster, that capacity is still relatively small, particularly when you compare it to the ACFI returns that a lot of providers realized historically. And so ultimately, this means providers who feel funding is inadequate need to look beyond care subsidy for additional revenue. And like Andrew mentioned as well, accommodation payment arrangements are under scrutiny in Canberra, and we have no sense of what changes might be in store, how significant they may be, or how quickly they may lead to increased revenue for providers. What I'll look at now is really the current framework, and when we look at industry performance, it's apparent that there is still plenty of capacity to improve for most providers. And so before I get into accommodation payments, firstly, just looking at the top graph, the basic daily fee, the fee that everyone pays for aged care. This one is not likely to change, even with a significant overhaul to accommodation payment arrangements. So it's also not going to do the heavy lifting that's required to buoy provider balance sheets. The basic daily fee is calculated according to the age pension, and the age pension is indexed according to cost of living. So this chart, we can see the daily rate of the basic daily fee changes in line with CPI. And so again, I think this is one where we can ensure that we're getting a accommodation related revenue stream. But what we really want to look at now is when we get into the mechanism that should be yielding more oomph for your P&Ls, and that being sort of the RAD and DAP non-supported accommodation payment arrangements. It is really important to understand the role of the maximum permissible interest rate. The MPIR approximates the cost of capital for an aged care provider, the rate that they would have to pay to borrow money. And so looking at the bottom graph, when Living Longer, Living Better was introduced in 2014, Interest rates were already near historic lows and continued to decline, and then really declined because of the pandemic. And now they are rapidly increasing due to inflationary pressures. So this means the system for calculating daily accommodation payments, DAPS, has significant inherent volatility. The NPIR is basically calculated as the cash rate plus 4%. Although we can see these are what's visualized on the chart. So the NPIR compared to cash plus 4%, pre-pandemic, it was consistently above that cash plus 4% measure, and has since mid 2020 been consistently below that comparison. And so at a macro level, this distinction is significant and has contributed to erosion in accommodation revenue. And we're looking at this period, from the introduction of LLB in 2014, and in those years, we have seen, housing boom, and cost of living has increased, and recently, cost of living is increasing quite rapidly. And so, just looking again at that top line, CPI has been relatively steady. Obviously a brief slowdown in 2020, and now, like I said, some larger increases recently. But that steadiness really is in quite a big contrast to what we'll look at on the next slide. And this is from 2015. So after 1 year into LLB, on the left, just looking at median house price. So median house price has increased over 50%. And over that same period, the agreed room price for residential aged care, non-supported agreed room price, increased 18%. So that's a full 32% below the pace. But I think perhaps maybe the more telling measure is that growth in agreed price is still 7% below CPI. So what this means in terms of market perception is, and for consumers that are looking at potentially selling their primary residence to fund a RAD, the daily equivalent becomes much more attractive. And with those really extremely low interest rates, DAPs are very cheap. And so they produce much lower yields. And over the years, this caused the industry's RAD DAP ratio to decline by about 13% to where we're currently sitting around 54%. So that's on the bottom right, the blue line. You can see 1 year into LLB, 65% of accommodation was being paid via refundable deposits, and that really eroded. And below that, the yellow line, looking at the agreed price as a percentage of the median house price. So we were, over 55% of the median house price was going into that accommodation payment arrangement, and that's declined. And so I guess what we're getting are lower payments based on prices that are not keeping pace with the market. And so that will, I guess, further play out on the next slide when we look at a few other measures where, so on the top, the other Commonwealth contribution, the accommodation supplement. So this is indexed along with cost of living and those other, Commonwealth contributions. So it is far less volatile. You can see that steady growth. And the other line is the non-supported revenue from accommodation payments. And this is looking at a combination of the implied return from refundable deposits and the DAPs. So you can very clearly see the impact of extremely low interest rates. And because permitted uses of RADs are quite restrictive, the implied return is also slightly lower in a low interest rate market, but the DAP is significantly lower. And so that's only now recently starting to recover. But when we look at the full history back to 2015, or actually before I describe that one, just looking at the chart below, so the dark blue line is occupancy. Everyone, I think, is really familiar with the decline in occupied bed days, but this decline, the steady decline in occupancy from right around 2016, there was a high point at 94%. All the way through 2022, when we started recovering. This all was really a result of new bed licenses being issued regularly during that period. So that yellow line, we see regular jumps in the available beds or the infrastructure, the industry infrastructure of places. And so I guess the reason I can say that that decline in occupancy is related to beds coming online is the total number of residents in care increased consistently. There was a slowdown during the pandemic, but ultimately we had more residents in care month on month, almost perpetually, and so despite there being more residents and a slight increase in agreed price, over 8 years, the non-supported accommodation revenue for the industry has decreased by 8%. And so that's that, really deep dip in that blue line on the top and starting to recover. But our current position compared to 8 years ago is still a loss of around 8% on the back of those interest rates. And so I think the message really is providers that have hit the upper limit of room prices at that $550,000 price can seek to get approval for a higher price, and many have. But really, most of the industry hasn't reached that boundary. The average agreed price for the last financial year was $450K. So that means every non-supported admission is leaving on average $100K on the table. And so that, in terms of financial stability and where do we seek the capacity for a more user pays approach in bolstering revenue through increased consumer contribution, the framework in place now, there's still that capacity, and so I think again we'll pass over to our panel, and I'll give it back to you, Andrew, to get some insights from them. But I think this might have been a bit of a foray into another area that we'll get more clarity as legislation is started to be communicated with potential changes. And I know we talk a lot about care minutes and AN-ACC, and I think that still is front of mind for most providers. But I just wanted to put this out as sort of the next step. What's coming in the next financial year, and once we get really comfortable with AN-ACC and care minutes, there is still just this other big piece of work pending.
Yeah, thanks, Tyler. And we've got 3 great panelists today. Substantial organizations, and one of the interesting aspects of that is significant businesses, significant payrolls. So some of these issues amplify, but also big going concerns. So there's a lot of momentum in those businesses as well. Some of them multi services. But I was talking to a provider this morning of a big size, and the hidden thing is the structure and the governance and the extra layers of regional management and things like that. Like, that's a significant amount of cost. And to some extent, the commission loves that. You know, they love the governance, they love the quality that brings, but it's not necessarily directly funded through this care minute approach, and the clearly the government's agenda is to look at controlling the margin that's available on care funding and making sure that it's mostly applied to care delivery. But they've also at the same time, to some degree, narrowed that definition of care. And we're all still trying to learn with some broad guidelines. We're all still trying to learn what that all means, and what is care minutes and what is not care minutes, certainly in the direct sense. And it's still interesting times, still quite early on into the, with only 3 QFRs having gone in. So it's still early days on that. But let me introduce you to our panel, Xavier, Greg, and Alan. Thanks so much, guys, for joining us. I'll ask you a couple of questions, one now and one a little bit later. But the first question I wanted to ask you now really is just what has been your approach, particularly in the last 9 months since AN-ACC has taken effect? What's been the impact on your businesses, and what's been front of mind for you as you looking at financial sustainability in the new world? What have been the big things you've been thinking about to this point? Xavier, we'll start with you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you. So for those who don't know, Uniting in New South Wales ACT, we have approximately just a little over 5,000 beds, probably about 3,000 home care packages, and probably a similar number, probably a little bit higher, clients receiving CHSP. We also have about 3,000 odd residents in our retirement living combination of affordable housing and traditional retirement living. Listening to Tyler there, I don't know why we're still here. Is what I'd say. That's sort of a rather pessimistic picture, but we still are, and we're battling through. I think what's uppermost in my mind over recent times is really rethinking how do we go about managing. I mean, in the past, a real big focus on managing rosters and managing hours, but I think probably to the negative. And I think probably now we're trying to think how do we line up occupancy, AN-ACC rates, and obviously care minutes, and then really trying to think about the levers of hotel services and general infrastructure. I really like where you took us there, Andrew. I think you need to think beyond, because I think care minutes are pretty dictated, and obviously even now pay rates tend to be a bit dictated as well. So your levers are fewer. So really trying to focus on occupancy, making sure AN-ACC is optimized to the care model we have in each site, and then thinking about how do we rework and rethink our hotel services and accommodation. I agree wholeheartedly with Tyler that pushing beyond the 550 is really important, and we do have options as providers to, within the current framework, to push user pays a bit harder where people can afford it. So it's a well-made point, but those are the kind of things that are on my mind at the moment.
Thanks, Xavier. Yeah, good points. Greg, what about you?
Thanks, Andrew. Look, very, very similar to Xavier's points. I guess for us, the last 9 months has been sort of thinking through how we approach 1 October in terms of care minutes and delivery, and working out what qualifies for care in this bizarre world where you have a Royal Commission that's said very clearly that we need to have a holistic view of care, and you have a funding structure that says it's not care unless a particular person doing a particular thing delivers it. So just trying to make sure that we optimise our care minute planning going forward. Rostering's been important, but I think for me, the thing, having a portfolio of homes is quite helpful. We have the good, the bad and the ugly across Anglicare. And I think if you look for a common theme of what works, the theme's stability. So where you've got stable occupancy, you're managing your compliance well, you've got good infection control, and by that I don't mean firewalls because they're all permeable, but I mean your response, and where you've got lowish staff turnover, if you can manage that. When you've got those conditions, the result seems to look after itself a little bit. So we've been concentrating on building for stability across our portfolio. So upskilling people, good work environments, keeping occupancy high is really important. I take the point also about user pays. We've done a lot of work around additional services, and we've also, particularly being in a Sydney-based organisation, it's common for our RADs to be greater than the 550. I would say that in both of those things, additional services and RADs, the bureaucracy around getting the user to pay is quite frustrating. And so I think if we were looking for some relief for the industry, it's taking some of those chains off would be helpful in allowing us to charge our customers what they're willing to pay.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. Interesting. Alan.
Yeah, hi everybody. Obviously, Lifecare slightly smaller, five homes, 500 beds roughly, Adelaide based. So similar story, but a little bit different. I guess we're fortunate in South Australia that we tend to have higher occupancy generally, and Lifecare we sit at about 98%. We get below that, we get a bit scared. So that does change the dynamics a little bit. That it's almost not quite locked in, not taken for granted, but it is almost a bedrock. I guess really for us, I mean, we started well and truly looking at this whole AN-ACC thing before, probably 12, 15 months ago, not 9 months ago. Did the same thing as the other guys have shared. We've reviewed all of our clinical structures, our leadership structures, and set ourselves probably a task to gradually introduce those changes so that they would be introduced in the quarter that is about to come. Major allied health review about how we do allied health and about whilst maintaining all of that sort of stuff, but how we maybe reduce costs there. Like everybody else, benchmarking and looking at all of our indirect costs, cleaning, laundry, catering, and all that sort of stuff. Interesting challenge with the corporate overheads, particularly with the compliance costs going through the roof. So we have reviewed that without making great savings. Even before AN-ACC, we were above the 550 where the socioeconomics of the area allowed, and at all of our homes, regardless of the socioeconomics, although the rate changes, we've got additional service fees for anybody who is financially able to pay. And that certainly gives us a little bit more flexibility than perhaps others that don't have that in place. I think with the user pays, it's part of the future. Certainly it's part of the equation. But our experience is, people already think they're paying too much. When you bring in the additional services fee and that sort of thing, the expectations just go up. So whilst on the bottom line, it works for us, I would say our experience would be at a couple of our sites, the expectations of some of the families almost make they certainly make it very hard on an operational basis, creates a whole new level of complexity, whilst the finances are quite nice. And it's something I think we're all going to have to deal with the sector. User pays isn't just going to go straight to your bottom line. It's going to ramp up expectations and create a whole new raft of challenges for us.
Yeah, thanks, Alan. I think picking up on all three of you, Xavier, you started it talking about the pessimistic view, and then Greg, you talked about just consistency, and Alan, you're talking about how much you've reviewed your costs and things like that. I think it's not unusual, isn't it, in lower margin businesses that that a consistent product or consistent delivery or consistent model is the only way to achieve sort of results, the only way to achieve predictable results. And I guess looking at those last few years, that I think the industry, without probably even knowing it, has just got better and better and better at innovating. There's a hidden innovation there where under that kind of pressure and on those kind of drivers to survive, you've had to innovate and find better ways of doing things, centralizing, decentralizing, better costs, better buying, better delivery, better, more efficiency in the way that you even deliver, even your care models. Certainly know most of the providers we work with are continuously reviewing their models of care, looking at better care and efficiency. Obviously goes without saying. And I think people in the industry like us forget it sometimes. And it's reminded, we were reminded when we were pulled up in the press lately, but you know, we all take it for granted that the whole purpose of what we're trying to do is care. And so when we talk about financial outcomes, we're talking about financial outcomes for the purposes of delivering better care. So that goes without saying. But yeah, that consistency is really key. So thanks for your comments there. One of the things I just wanted to touch on quickly, because what we want to turn to with the panel is looking forward. So what next? So I'll come back to you guys in a minute and just ask you about what you think you're going to be doing next to sort of ensure financial viability and therefore by proxy what the industry might want to be thinking about and other people listening today. But before we get there, what we do like to do in these webinars is give people something to take away that things they may or may not be doing, but certainly the things that we recommend are core right now to be looking at your financial viability. And really it's about operational efficiency in an AN-ACC world. And it probably we speak to at least 100 different providers every month. So over a number of months, we're really getting a good picture of where people are thinking. And largely in this 1 year honeymoon period, where the money was given and the care minute obligation wasn't mandatory, a substantial amount of the industry has been dealing with other things and not necessarily building up their care minutes too early, which is not necessarily a bad strategy, I don't think, but it's certainly thinking about where they're going to get that staff, etc. But they've enjoyed that honeymoon period and slightly better margins, but those margins will disappear and we'll end up in the new world, even with the wage increase funding. That'll all go and we'll end up in the intended new world, which is quite narrow margins, and which will completely depend on the organization's ability to efficiently manage its care minutes and its rosters and make sure that those two things are working in sync. And what I say is optimizing your revenue by fully recovering the subsidy that you're entitled to based on the independent assessment process. So here are a few things that you can think about. Certainly, they're not in any particular order, but they're 8 things that you definitely could be thinking about right now if you're not already. So improved reporting at a management level. We're seeing a lot of people putting in better BI reporting, better per bed per day reporting, which is sort of a byproduct of trying to create QFR data, but on the whole has given people better management level view of what their business is doing, which I think has been very, very positive. So investing in that better level reporting and having that better level of understanding of where your business is at on a daily basis rather than a sort of monthly P&L basis has been a very positive outcome, and people, I think, should keep going in that direction. It's not necessarily an expensive exercise. Some is better than none, and it's good, better, best. Improved systems and data capability at a resident level. That there's a very big difference between number 1 and number 2. There's a lot of organizations who have better reporting at a management level, get better visibility, and I think that is giving them everything they need to know to operate in an AN-ACC world. We would argue that it doesn't, because to actually see your position from a reporting point of view is very different to then going and doing something about it. So you've got funding people and other people at an operational level who then need to decide what are the actual individual resident level transactions that you need to make and take to achieve whatever result you're looking to achieve based on the reporting that's been shown. So you need a transaction level information and basically an AN-ACC management system of some kind that's telling you if you do this and do this and do this at a transaction level, it will give you the result you're looking for at the reporting level. So those are 2 very different things. Embedding a new process for reviewing all residents for potential changes in AN-ACC on a minimum 2 to 3 monthly basis. There is still a significant amount of the industry we can see through our stats who are still trading on shadow assessments. So the need to be keeping your AN-ACC classifications fresh, that doesn't mean you reclassify people. That just means that you're assessing them on a regular basis yourself, so that you know where your classifications are today and you know where your classifications could be tomorrow, because the difference between those 2 classifications can achieve a lot in terms of keeping your rosters stable, i.e. changing classifications and not the rosters, or potentially increasing funding or decreasing funding or whatever it is that you need to achieve. But knowing what their classifications should be as they change yourself is critical. So building those processes in on a very, very regular basis is really, really important. And therefore, how you track that information and capture it's important. Efficient care minute reporting for quarterly financial reporting. I think you've all done 3 rounds of QFR reporting. I think everyone's starting to get the hang of what it's all about, and in many cases how painful it is, and where our systems are lacking and that sort of thing. Definitely building towards having your care minutes substantially sitting in your rostering platform in particular, but also your payroll, and having those processes being able to come together in a fairly streamlined way is a really, really important part of that. But also your care minute policy. So we strongly advocate that you have a physical document, whether you call it a policy or how that sits in your own organization, but you have a physical document that captures your assumptions on how you're interpreting the current care minute guidelines and how that's flowing through to your QFR. It has so many knock-on effects to the way that you structure your rosters, and the way that you put information into your position descriptions, the gap between where your care minutes are now and where they have to be. Just having that confidence that you are at the right care minute level now is a really, really important part of what everybody should be doing right now. And not just doing that analysis on a spreadsheet, but doing that on creating a policy that puts down your assumptions about how you've interpreted the guidelines will be really, really important as things change, maybe when we get new legislation, but also as people start turning up and questioning, as we know they will, how you've interpreted those things. You can produce a document that says, look, here it is, it's all written down. You tell us where you're wrong, where you think we're wrong. And there is a lot of gray area in there. So there's a lot of work to do in that space. Obviously, a review of the efficiency of your rosters, what the optimal operating balance is between funding and care minutes for each facility. I mean, we advocate, what a good roster is, what an achievable roster is, how to deliver the most efficient roster possible. Try to bring your classifications and your funding in line with those achievable rosters. And if you can operate at that level, you can probably sustain that for a longer period of time at a more predictable margin. And if that works for you, notwithstanding all of the discussion we've had about cross-subsidization between care funding and other parts of your business, it's not possible for some businesses right now because everyone's generated cost bases based on ACFI funding, which went beyond, the subsidy that's going to be available now between AN-ACC, between the funding and the care minutes. So it's not always possible, but at some point, getting your achievable, efficient roster known, and then getting your classifications to be managed and maintained in line with that so you can achieve a predictable margin, that will be the secret of AN-ACC. A review process on the new quality indicators, of course. How are you going to do that? A lot of organizations are approaching us at the moment saying, now I'm producing all of this quality indicator information. What am I going to do with it? Is there a way that we can actually look at this information and actually improve our business beyond just compliance reporting? And the understanding of your star ratings, that's probably something that goes up top a bit further. How you want to achieve star ratings, how you want to operate in that world. Because in our view, star ratings are not just a consumer index, and the whole industry is divided between whether you care about that or you don't care about that. But what the star ratings is a construct of performance areas of your business, your compliance, your quality, your consumer experience, and your care minutes. So to some degree, and certainly the Quality and Safety Commission, in the absence of a black and white, you're meeting your care minutes or you're not meeting your care minutes, is using the star ratings, care minutes construct to target 1-star, 2-star providers as a way of where do you start? Where do you start looking at people? And it'll be the 1-star, 2-star. So definitely getting off the bottom of that in terms of care minutes will get you off that radar and give you more time to get your business in balance. So there's a lot of information there, something to take away. But hopefully most of you are looking at most of those. And that's our view on a bunch of things that you can be doing right now to be moving towards that transformed state that everybody said in the earlier survey is going to be a constant change even from now on. So let's go back to the panel. So now is the interesting bit, guys. Now we're talking about what's next. Where are we going? What are you going to be doing now? You've set your budgets for FY24, no doubt, although probably it took a few revisions. And we're going to embark on 12 months where care minutes become mandatory, and then somewhere at the end of that financial year, you know, we're going to have a new set of standards that need to be implemented, and possibly new legislation in and around there as well. So let's work backwards now, Alan. Like, what are you looking to the future for? What do you think people should be thinking about?
Look, I think a lot of the stuff you put up there, Andrew, is spot on. But you know, I guess most of the people on this webinar or podcast are accountants, and it's easy for us accountants to do budgets and do all the sorts of management reporting and performance, cost per day per bed and all that sort of stuff. So I think we'll be focusing on the cultural changes that we need to actually embed that better stuff. So stuff that excites me and the senior team doesn't necessarily translate well to our managers and to the floor. So we'll be focusing on not just the systems, but also the culture about how do we actually really embed some of this and drive some of the change. Margins are decreasing. That's a fact. Everyone knows it, but how do you actually really drive that efficiency and actually use these tools better and have that culture that's responsive to it? I think that's our internal challenge. And I would imagine for many providers, it's all well and good to have the systems and processes and all the reports, but if no one's acting on them, it's not much good. So I'd say in a nutshell, that's whilst looking at some of the stuff that you've touched on, and everyone's capital position is different, but also looking at that we'll be looking at that reoccurring versus capital funding as well. I think a big one, but over and above all the sort of stuff you're talking about, we are looking at business systems and reporting, but big focus for me is the culture, to actually change the culture to actually operate successfully in this environment with different tools and different expectations.
Sorry, push the wrong button. Yeah, that's definitely right, Alan. It's a really good spin on it. We're really a people business, aren't we? So it's one thing to have the systems and the processes, but if people aren't doing it, or people aren't bought into it, or people don't see the value in it, it gets undermined really quickly, doesn't it? Yeah, excellent.
Yeah. Because a lot of our staff, and I think it's to be true of most, a lot of our staff think, oh yeah, more staff, that's good. AN-ACC minutes, more staff. There's no understanding of the costs and under the challenges. So it's about changing that culture and pitching in a way that people understand, so we can actually move forward and drive the changes successfully.
Because it's quite a blunt instrument, isn't it? It's like a lot of times I talk to providers and they're asking me questions about why is it like this and why is it like that? And one of the answers I often give is it's a one size fits all model. They can only build one unit. And everyone, no matter what you're like and how you're delivering and what your model of care is or what your focus is or what your structure is or what the diversification is, it's the same for everyone. It can't possibly fit everyone properly, can it?
Yeah. I think you're right. I think someone touched on earlier, the Royal Commission said we're missing joy. We've got to put the joy back into aged care. Well, we've put the care minutes back in there, but the lifestyle's not included. So how do you explain to a lifestyle, as an employee who does lifestyle, you don't count towards those care minutes? Therefore, we're going to look about how we reclassify you and how we do your role differently. I mean, it's a challenge, but I go back. It's really for us now, it's focusing on the people bit as well as not just the systems, but it's the people bit as we improve our systems.
Well, you've set the bar high, mate, because now if anybody doesn't talk about people, you're going to seem cold, Greg. But I'll flick to you now, Greg. What about you, and what's your organisation looking forward to? Where's the secret sauce?
Look, all the things that you talked about, Andrew, are on our agenda. We're probably behind where we'd like to be in terms of our rostering maturity. So I think we really need to focus on that. Staff is a big issue. It's where we spend all our money, so we've got to get that right. And so making sure people do have quality of employment so that they enjoy what they're doing. We've got to think about the way that we sort of structure roles. Like everybody in the industry, we see high turnover, and the best way of dealing with that is not improving your recruiting, it's stopping people leaving. So hopefully some of the sort of wage funding will help that a little bit, but it's important for us to create work environments that people enjoy working in, and keep a consistent staff in each of our homes. I'd like to see the minor miracle of having 22 homes that can all operate from the same process and platform. So that consistency thing, when you've got a large number of homes, is really important, making sure that we learn from the places that do things well and replicate that in the places that don't do things so well. So that's a challenge for an organisation like Anglicare.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things we're working with one provider who's, you know, questioning all of that quality indicator stuff. Like I mentioned earlier, it's like, what can we actually do with all of this information that's valuable? How can we actually use all of the stuff that we're being forced to provide and use it in a way that actually pushes something back to our facilities that they can really use to improve. So I like that kind of attitude towards innovation, that the innovation isn't just from necessity and for efficiency. The innovation has to be for
outcomes.
Yeah. Saviour, what about you?
I think when you asked earlier about what's been on our minds, I mean, I think two big shocks, COVID and workforce crisis over recent last 9 months or so, but COVID over the last 2 or 3 years. So I think I quite like where Alan and Greg took us in terms of culture, stability, really thinking about how we use that, how we hopefully, when we get to a point of greater stability, less agency use, less turnover and the like. But really, the next few months are about saying, how do we recover some of that push on innovation? How do we recover some of that you know, I love where Alan took us. How do we recover some of the joy that should be in our care services? So really, that's probably where I would like to go. I think what that does to connect the two things is if we're doing those things well, then financially things like occupancy start to look after themselves, things like star ratings look after themselves. Yeah. You know, and people want to be in our services. Our services are places where people are choosing to be. So I think there's, you know, you talk about secret sauce, you know, having our care workers and our nurse teams and our frontline teams really humming and working as a team, focusing on innovation, leaning into some of the opportunities that might be coming. To me, that they're the real opportunities, Andrew. And I think we've got a chance to do those. I was quite surprised when you said that the last couple of years people have been innovative. I think we've just struggled to stay afloat the last couple of years rather than being innovative. I think the last couple of years has been about struggling just to stay afloat and keep ourselves safe, and more importantly, in recent times with workforce, keep ourselves open. So I think really, I'm hopeful that next couple of years really see us have an opportunity to say, well, those two significant shocks are somewhat behind us. I think the wage increase will help. I think the stabilization of the pandemic will help. I think really it's about saying, how do we lean into that reform, and how do we then say, hey, we're here for the residents and those clients, and really trying to provide the best quality service possible, in spite of some of the financial challenges. And I think some of those we got to own. I think you know, where Tyler took us was really important in terms of, you know, thinking about accommodation fees and thinking about user pays where people can afford it. But really, for me, it's a focus on the model, a focus on what we're doing and what we're trying to achieve. And really, the heart of that is our teams. So so I can't stress it enough. We've got to get that right. We've got to keep getting that right, and hopefully no more shocks. Hopefully no more massive shocks, which I think the last couple of years have been characterised by.
Yeah, well, arguably this industry probably coped with it better than any industry. Continued to thrive. Yeah, innovation's a funny thing, because most people think about innovation as being, you know, sort of that transformative rather than the incremental. But and most innovation, Saviour, comes out of war. So it's the innovation out of necessity that's probably the largest amount of innovation in the world, and you know, we've had plenty of that.
Yeah, I think for us, Andrew, I think I'd characterise it a little bit differently. I think we reverted to tasks. We reverted to getting things done. So yeah. The innovation, I think the challenge of the last couple of years didn't really create new ways of working as much as a reversion to some old ways of working. At least that's our perspective. And I think we, you know, whether it be a focus on COVID and infection control, and focus on making sure that, you know, basic things were done, people were fed, nutrition was attended to, care was delivered. I think that for me is that's me characterised the last few years. I think they've been a very different few years. than my experience in aged care or human services. And yeah, so coming out of that sort of focus on task and focusing on the person is really where I'd like to see us move. And so for me, I don't know that the shock has been all that nice for people in our care services. I think it's been quite detrimental because we have reverted, I think, to type a little bit, which isn't good for those punters who are in our care.
Yeah, excellent points, and definitely looking forward to more stability for sure. I do have a couple more questions. Before I do that, I might just flick to Petra and just see what people have been chatting about, see if there's anything in there we want to raise, any particular question or any particular theme that's been running through there, Petra.
Yeah, so probably three main themes. We did have a question from someone on the strategy or process for selecting clients. So whether to balance, lower AN-ACC income with higher propensity or capacity to pay. And yeah, what maybe some of the panelists think about that. Also the types of additional services and how they're classified and offered as packages. So what are other people doing in that respect? And then, yeah, just some people sharing their own experiences and strategies on how they balanced raising the prices with the potential impact it might have on occupancy.
Yeah, and I think that it's hard to measure, but to some extent, the competitiveness because of falling occupancy, the perceived competition between providers kept pricing down, especially when there was another avenue, which is ACFI. You could drive revenue out of ACFI and keep the accommodation prices down. We're not in that world anymore, so that'll be interesting. I think let's just address maybe the first one, which is, I mean, it's targeting, and the department has been sort of very concerned about this. The idea that you would look at a particular resident as being beneficial or not beneficial. I think in our experience, at least, most people are either too worried about occupancy to worry about that, or just not sophisticated enough to be making that decision at the point of entry, particularly when their care needs and the needs of the facility and so many other things are going on at that same moment, that worrying about the exact impact financially of that, other than the RAD-DAP question, which is always a strategy set at some point, is probably not realistic that people would be able to target very well at that point of view. But maybe, if we go forward into an accommodation world where, we are targeting people who have a greater propensity to pay, it is actually related. I'll just add to it, to one of my questions, which is when you look at the supported resident ratio and it hovers around 30, 40, 50, 60%, you end up with a two-speed facility where half the residents are potentially affluent and half of them aren't. And you're trying to create one service to all of those people. Maybe people have suggest to us, maybe we're going to end up in a two-tiered world where you have supported residents up to 90% or supported residents under 10%, and you can offer a different type of service. Where all, in the lower supported, you have a lot more additional services, and the high supported you don't. Any comments from any of you guys about that area of trying to be sophisticated about who you bring into your facility, or if that's even possible?
I think for us, the sole focus is, can we care for this person as a resident of our facility? All occupancy is good occupancy at the moment in Sydney. So we just need to make sure that we can actually care for their needs. If we can't, then we need to find somewhere else for that person to be cared for.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point.
Sorry, Alan, you're right.
No, you go ahead, Xavier.
I think the other variable too is, if you come out of Sydney and you think about regional areas, and you think about you might be the only service provider in that town, or the only service provider with the capacity to provide that sort of care, that level of care. So there might be another hostel or another way of thinking about it. So I think it's a difficult one. I think it's really challenging. So I think it's more about fit than beneficial. Is this resident a fit? Can we do the right thing by them? And that, rather than is it beneficial? So, and I think, the inflexibility of rosters makes that, as we've talked about, makes that very difficult to judge each resident as to whether they're a fit or not, whether they're beneficial to your service or not going forward. But No, it is difficult. It's challenging. It's a different level of thinking about who do you bring on, but in some ways not different too. ANAC had a similar sort of challenge. Sorry, ACFI had a similar sort of challenge in terms of new residents always sort of coming in a lower rate than older residents departing. So it's not a dissimilar challenge, but you know, it's something we cope with. But I like where Greg went. All occupancy is good occupancy.
I think so, Alan.
Yeah, look, I think it always has to start with fit. I'm not sure that all occupancy is good occupancy. And there again, I'm in Adelaide, so we've got a slightly different profile, but it is about fit. I think going forward though, with user pays, I think there will be the opportunity, not ad hoc on individual residents, but I think strategically, maybe not across a whole organisation, but in certain socioeconomic areas, to move one way or the other, like you mentioned, Andrew. And at the moment, you know, we charge additional services fees so those can part, but the service is identical. Whether that's a viable option going forward, I don't know. And I do worry though, well, not worry, I do have a concern that with the deregulation and people can just build where they want, if we have a user pay system where we're charging more, there'll be people that just opt out of the system, and there'll be people that start taking the more affluent and creating a, you know, the private aged care outside the system thing. I think that's got the potential to growth, and they'll cherry pick potentially a lot of the more wealthier people, which will leave the likes of us talking about. You know, it's all well and good to take about user pays, but the really truly wealthy are being cherry picked, and because there's better services. We might well have to focus on the concessional and how we actually make that work. So I think there's a lot to be unpacked, and I think each individual organisation is going to have to look at what does user pays if the government goes down the path they're talking about. I think it could change how we approach everything.
And the other question I was going to ask, which comes into that, is generational change. So we're just about to change a whole generation, which is a lot more affluent, has much bigger expectations. You can even see that to some extent coming through things like the consumer feedback and the questions around food. I mean, the way that the questions asked, which is, do you like the food? You know, almost necessitates a bad answer, because no one likes the food all the time. How can you possibly do that? So, yeah, just to touch on quickly the additional services questions rather than go to you guys just out of time, but we've done quite a lot of work on additional services, and it's a very mixed, very, very messy. Nobody does it particularly well. Not many people do it particularly well. A lot of people do it, and it varies significantly. I think there's some great space for innovation there, but on the other hand, you guys are delivering care. You're not hotel services, and you know there is a certain level of sophistication required. Anyone who's been in a bad hotel knows how hard it is to get a service delivered reliably, on time, at the right price, etc. So the ability to be able to know who to deliver that to, who not to deliver that to deliver that to a discerning client and an aging client, you know, with a stressed out family, you know, it's very precarious at best. So. Yeah, that's why we talked about that two-tiered model, where you know that everyone here gets a good service, not good service, but a additional service, and everyone here gets a more basic service based on their needs. But the care level is exemplary for both, so that's not in question. So, I guess just to quickly, in the interest of time, I just wanted to just leave a couple of things in people's minds. There's QFR code here. We have this budget reforecast report, just reminding everybody there is a change in pricing from the 1st of July, obviously bringing in that funding, the extra funding, and the new ANAC price. And then there is a change in relative value units. So there is a change in care minutes associated with each of your classifications. So your costs on the 1st of October. So all of you, and they're not uniformly up or down, they're all over the place. So it really matters how your profile in your individual sites match the profile of the industry, and how the changes in those RVUs affect your particular cohort and therefore your cost base. So there is a report that we have. It's free. We can do it for you. It will show you those changes. I'm sure a lot of you are analyzing that to a certain extent, but if you want a validation externally by us, it doesn't cost anything. Get that QFR and we can create that report for you. anyone who's struggling with all of the stuff that we're talking about, those 8 things that I said, we can do this in a very intensive way for you for 3 months. Just come in, review everything, give you a lot more confidence that either your processes are on track or help fix the ones that aren't. So please contact us if you're struggling, you need help. Remember that the October 1 mandatory care minutes, they're not measuring that from July to September, they're measuring that from June to August. So we are already in the measurement period that is measuring daily your care minutes delivered for mandatory requirement in October. So wherever you are today is already affecting your mandatory requirement in October. So if you need help, reach out. Our next webinar is FY24 preview. Now, this was very financially focused. The next one is looking at all of the things that are going to be on your plate, really dealing with that transformation question. You've got new standards, you've got further quality indicators, you've got lots of things changing within the next 12 months that's going to affect your organization overall. Let us help you have a conversation around what are all of the transformation agenda and levers that are going to be affecting your organization in the next one with the FY24 preview. We'll be looking at all the things you need to worry about in the next 12 months. This one was a very much a deep dive on financials. So please sign up for that. And otherwise, thank you so much. Thanks, Greg, Xavier, and Alan, so much for giving up your time. Really, really appreciate it. It's what makes these worthwhile. And I hope everybody has a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks. Bye.